MIM Virtual Expo 2021.
Hi, my name's Andrew Skinner. I'm really pleased to be here at the MIM Virtual Expo 2021, talking to you a little bit about global incident management at HSBC. So before we get started, just a little bit about my background. From humble beginnings as a stockroom assistant in WH Smith's many years ago, I progressed through a number of IT service management, customer-facing organisations until just about 2.5 years ago. I was fortunate enough to be appointed the global head of incident management. Prior to that, quite a long stint at a UK telco, and at the end of the presentation I'm just going to talk a little bit about my kind of observations around the two differences in that space, but that's really where I learnt, if you like, most of the craft of major incident management. And certainly if you were a customer of that particular organisation in 2012 or 2018 and were suffering service problems, I was probably the person trying to get all that resolved for you. But let me talk to you about my current role, current position as Global Head of Incident Management for HSBC and what that entails. Start with a little bit about HSBC itself, and it's fairly easy to say here that HSBC is a phenomenally big organisation. So 40 million customers in 64 countries and territories. We've got 250,000 colleagues in over 6,000 locations, although of course that was pre-COVID, and we pivoted to working about 95% of our people from home or remote locations anyway. That's now starting to change, but that's the scope of where our customers are. Nearly 8,500 IT services that we run and operate, and combined they give 2.7 billion minutes of service availability across the year. And alongside that, of interest to major incident management, we do about one change every minute across our global IT estate. And all that is to say, you know, HSBC, really big organisation, and any and all of those things could be what the major incident management team are called in to help cover. So what about that team? Where are they? What do they do? So we sit in key regional locations. There's about 60 of the team altogether, and they operate 24/7. We have a team covering the Americas, and they're split across sites in Mexico and North America. We have a team covering EMEA, and they're split out across Sheffield and Krakow in Poland. And then Asia Pacific is covered by our teams in Hong Kong and Hyderabad. Our aim, as with most other major incident organisations, is to kind of communicate and orchestrate the fix of that very top percentage of incidents that give the most risk to the customer, and in this case, to our HSBC business. Given the size and the scale of HSBC, that top 0.1% of all our IT-related incidents is about 2,000 incidents a year across the globe. And over on the right-hand side, although I've anonymised it a bit, as you'll understand, in terms of the numbers of incidents that we get across the global estate and the size of those teams, you can see that EMEA kind of has most of those incidents, but not quite the biggest team. APAC second biggest number of incidents and the biggest team, and then the Americas has the smallest team. Now, what we don't do in this model is we don't operate follow the sun, which is what some organisations would do who have a global footprint. The approach we tend to take is that we have specialism and strong relationships in region, so we understand the key stakeholders, the services, the client customer base, and while we can and have done, you know, pass incidents over between those regions, that's more by exception than by the rule, really. So pretty big team, 24/7, as you would expect. So the next question that everybody kind of asks me when I talk about HSBC is, you know, what's the technology stack? And I think as major incident managers and people in the IT industry, we're always really interested in that. So let me talk to you just a little bit high level about the kind of tools and stuff that we use. So we have a mix of legacy, in-house and industry standard tooling. And this, of course, is just our major incident management technology stack. There are, lots of other support teams that have their own monitoring and alerting and operational tools. I'm just talking here about major incident management. Our aim, in fact, we have a program now started to deploy ServiceNow as our central IT service management tool set, starting at the end of this year, 2021, and then rolling out into 2022. So we touch a little bit on that here. If I work from left to right, first of all, what we have is our federated DevOps model in HSBC means that some other businesses, or many of the other businesses, have purchased their own IT service management tools. So we have a fairly spread out set of tools and services, all of which feed into our central tool, which is goes by the initials of GSD, which means our global service desk. And that's our current central platform. And that's based on CA's Service Desk Manager tool, although it's a heavily customized version. You certainly wouldn't be able to find some of the things that it does in any of the off-the-shelf versions. So we have that as our central ITSM tool. All the other ITSM tools from the businesses link into GSD, and then we also link it back out to some other platforms in the IT service management space, CMDBs, service portfolios, systems that hold onto our availability schedules and so on. We then have, in major incident management, we have a tool called Grids, and this is a proprietary tool, and it's what we use to manage major incidents. So in effect, they are escalated or elevated out of the GSD, which is the tool that everybody uses, and then we run our major incidents in there. It provides an element of diary recording, decision recording, communication capability, and it's also where we kind of capture all the key metrics that drives our performance indicators and control mechanisms, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. Those first three blocks, though, will be replaced by ServiceNow as we start to deploy and migrate users onto that in line with the program I mentioned earlier. So start at the end of 2021 and then move through into 2022. Really key program and project for HSBC, and one of our key tenets here is to kind of stay out of the box as much as we possibly can. We know lots of other kind of colleagues and competitors and other organizations who've done ServiceNow have tried to customize it. We're definitely trying to stay away from that because we recognize that there are benefits to going out of the box. So a big organizational change that will accompany that. We have another set of tools that I've kind of wrapped up as titled as Service Health, and they are region-specific service health dashboards, and they're built on all the industry standard kind of monitoring and alerting platforms that you would expect them to be, and they give us a live view of the performance of some of our critical services across each of the regions. We're not kind of in a place where it's our de facto role to monitor those, but it gives us a level of insight when we're running incidents or when we're hearing reports of service issues for us to go and verify against. So we have access to those, and they're used by our command control organization, some of our network operations teams, and many of the other support teams as well, but it allows us that extra insight. One of the other things that allows us some extra insight, we have some licensing arrangements with Down Detector that gives us an enhanced view of the data that you would expect to get from that. So many of you will be familiar with the public-facing Down Detector. It's all crowdsourced real-time impact information, but you can get professional licenses that allow you a little bit more information, actually quite a lot more information behind that. And in the UK at least, we found that to be quite useful for helping us see emerging issues on our digital services. in order to kind of accelerate that response to them, in line with, of course, our digital support teams. We use Xmatters to alert and engage our engineers and our support teams, but we also build on top of that and use it to send notifications for our major incidents, and also to trigger our major incident escalation calls, our management escalation calls, or kind of crisis bridges. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And I guess, like many organisations, we've embraced Zoom over the last year to 2 years, and that's our core video conferencing tool. It's what I'm recording this session on today. And it allows us to run and then record some of our technical crisis calls, and of course share information across the teams so that people can see exactly what we're talking about in terms of service health dashboard, alerting, and all that kind of good stuff. And then Microsoft Teams. So this is our core collaboration platform across HSBC, but we're starting to build the integration with Xmatters, which means that we can start to have real-time interactive comms capability. So both sharing information outwards to the team, but also, sharing information outward to the organisation and key stakeholders, but also having that live conversation with the team. And it's not unusual for us to have kind of 3 or 4 or more Teams chats happening at the same time. So we'll be running a crisis chat, we'll be doing a heads up out to some of our senior stakeholders, the team and I and some of the service management leads will be having a conversation, we'll be reaching out across different parts of the businesses to gather some of that additional info. So that is proving to be very successful for us. We just need to make some further tweaks and the integration to Xmatters, and then onwards to ServiceNow and Zoom, and we're looking at quite a powerful response platform, if you like, that enables us to do a holistic escalation, communication, information sharing crisis call. So yeah, that's our technology stack. Probably nothing too radical in that space for people to see and understand. In terms of the life cycle that we run, again, nothing particularly out of the ordinary here. We run a standard incident major life cycle with all the phases that you would expect, from failure through to detect, through to resolve, and then onwards with problem management. But there are a couple of kind of little nuances that I think it's just worth talking on, and I'll touch on those now. So even though we have a DevOps operating model across HSBC, where we have teams who are very capable of resolving their own incidents, there are certain incidents that, due to the impact to the business and to our customers and to our stakeholders, we require my team, a global major incident management team, to kind of run those and to orchestrate them, as well as those issues that affect multiple parts of our organization. We sit within the IT organization, the IT delivery organization for core global services. So where we have multiple issues, then we're running those incidents by default. But where we have DevOps teams supporting incidents, when we recognize that they cross a certain threshold into our major incidents, then we kind of push those support teams to make sure that they're not trying to hold on to them for too long, that they do engage major incident management, because we can mobilize global resource, make sure that the right people are engaged, make sure that stakeholders are aware, both internally and enabling external communication, and make sure that we are expediting those service recovery activities. Between the mobilize and the resolve phase, that's the time and the place where we're kind of at our most obvious. So we're running communications and management escalation calls in an iterative fashion, as you would expect. And as I mentioned before, we use Xmatters to trigger those management escalation calls and to send our major incident notifications. For those of you familiar with Xmatters, It sends app notifications and it sends email notifications as well. So that that's out with quite a large range of our user base in order for them to get that fast information really quickly. And we work on a subscription basis, as you would expect us to do with X Matters, where we can enable people to pick one of about 10 or 12 different sets of data and decide which regions, which countries, which severity of incident, whether it's regulatory notifiable or not, and a host of other activities and options. And that's what drives our notification channels. Within that cycle, we run our management escalation calls, and we're really key on these that they have a single purpose, and that purpose is purely to accelerate that incident recovery by getting all the right people together and kind of acting as a decision-making forum where the direct focus is, can we bring this service back up? And whilst that's our purpose and our intent, for anybody listening in the major incident world, I'm sure you'd recognise that's not always as easy as you would want it to be. Lots of people want to bring other conversations in and raise other subjects, and so we try and make it really clear that this is not a problem solving, it's not a technical diagnostic, it's not a problem management investigation. So we like to bring them to a sharp focus and run them in terms of minutes rather than rather than like halves of hours. So what is the problem? What are my options? What escalation do I need? What decisions do I need? And what activity does everybody else need to take is pretty much the top and bottom of those activities. And then once they're resolved, we obviously hand off to problem management, as you would expect us to do, and they complete their incident review process to not only determine root cause and how we can either mitigate that issue ever happening again or fix it faster if it does happen again, but we also pursue a read across activity, which basically asks the question, could we be exposed to this issue anywhere else in our organization? If you think back to that kind of first or second slide, there's 8,500 IT services. We're in 64 countries and territories. It's a huge global footprint. So, a setting or a configuration or a patch or a piece of software that has become problematic in Asia Pacific, we probably ought to check that that's not anywhere else across the globe. So we have a really rigorous read across process that not only looks at software and process, but also architecture to see whether we can get ahead of seeing repeat problems out in other parts of the organization. Okay, so let me move on from that. We're saying here that we operate a fairly standard major incident lifecycle. We maybe do a slightly unorthodox way of determining severity. So we only use, for major incident management, 4 simple factors to determine our severity. And we deliberately chose to avoid any hard data points or definitive values, because what we found was that in a live incident scenario, trying to figure out whether it's 501,000 customers or 504,000 customers, which might be the difference between one severity and the other, that's really difficult to find in a live situation. So what we've empowered the major incident management team to do is to think about these 4 factors. What type of service is it that's impacted? Is it something that's core to the way that customers expect to transact with the bank, or is it something core to how we run the bank? Is it something we use to operate as a set of colleagues, or is it something else? How disrupted is it? So really simple, is it down, is it degraded, or is it something else? How big is this? And again, I'm stressing here, there are no hard data points or definitive values, but how many customers or colleagues, or how much money, or how many payments, or how many transactions are involved? And major incident management make a call. Is it lots or some or a few? Comparative to the size of the bank and other services that we offer. And then exposure is all about really, brand and customer and social media, but most importantly, regulatory exposure. So as a heavily regulated operator in a heavily regulated sector, we have to think about, if our core services are degraded, then not only are a lot of people likely to be affected, then it's likely to attract a lot of attention from regulators who want us to offer those services consistently and at almost 100% availability. So we combine those in a relatively simple way, and we run a severity between severity 0, which is kind of the worst that you could expect to happen, multi-site data center loss, all the way down to through severity 1 and 2. Severity 3 is kind of our bread and butter, and then there's an occasional severity 4 and maybe even down to a severity 5, which we sometimes send out as warnings and heads up and alerts. So that's how we determine our severity, and I know that other banks, other financial organisations, and in fact other IT organisations tend to take a very specific, hard data point approach to that. We found that this is pretty good in terms of being able to make fast and, on the whole, very accurate calls on what severity we're running it at. And we deliberately chose severity, just as an interesting byline. We deliberately chose severity because, as we talked about when we talked in terms of priority, there was a very large non-IT base of stakeholders that we have, and that priority has certain connotations about if it's not priority 1, then you're not treating it as quickly as you ought to be able to. This is all about being able to help people understand how bad this is for the bank, not how fast we're approaching it. So severity rather than priority. We also choose to swarm around major incidents. We have a huge focus in HSBC, not only from a regulatory perspective, but just because this is in our DNA, this is how we operate. Is we just want everything back up as quickly as possible, and however many people we kind of have to throw at it, that's the approach we want to take. We don't want to look back in a review and say, if we'd have escalated it a bit faster, would have resolved that earlier. So we tend to, in major incident management, we tend to have at least 3 or 4 people on at any one point. And when a major incident breaks, then we do assign out a major incident chair. So that role is to drive the technical crisis call and then chair any management escalation calls that may arise. But they're making the decision on what severity it is and trying to coalesce and corral everybody together. We then assign someone the role of major incident support, and they are there to coordinate the comms, capture the timeline from the crisis calls and the MEX, make sure we've got a very clear record of who said what and what decisions were taken and what we did, and they kind of go out and get hold of that extra resource if that's what we need. And the thinking behind that is that usually leaves at least one major incident manager free to kind of deal with any other emerging incidents. And of course, that model is only as good as long as you don't have 2 or 3 concurrent major incidents, which of course we do every now and again. And at that point, we roll the chair and support roles into one, but on the whole, we like to operate them separately. And what we're supported by is what we call the all hands on deck process, which is exactly that, right? If we think we have a big failure on certain key services, then we hit what we call the all hands on deck, and that pulls together a whole host of nominated individuals. So technical support teams, some teams that we call red teams, so they are fast response support individuals, very skilled in some of our core processes and core services, service recovery managers who sit out in the business, IT service owners who understand everything about the service, how it's constructed, the end-to-end service chain mapping, what its agreements are, who uses it, all that kind of good information, and then many of our global technical leads. So we will rather bring everybody together and then let them drop away as they validate that their services are not causing the issue that we're seeing, than go through a kind of a serial approach of bringing person person A from team A and then maybe person A from team B, and that's not the approach that we want to take. And that does work very well. Getting as many people in front of a major incident as we can does tend to drive really effective resolution. In terms of how we are measured, so our process is governed by controls, and this is because of the organisation we're in and the sector that we operate in. And the point of controls, for those people that aren't aware, and I have to admit, when I joined the bank, controls wasn't something that wasn't known very well to me. This is about evidencing that we are mitigating business risk by consistently operating the process in the way that we have designed it to be operated. And there are a host of these controls that sit, but the four big ones really are about identification, mobilization, response, and communication. So do we get full outage incidents to us within 30 minutes? Do we mobilize all our recovery teams within 15 minutes? Do we initiate crisis calls within 20 minutes from the incident starting? And do we have our incident management communications sent out within 15 minutes of being notified? And on the whole, we're doing pretty well. The one where we would like to be a little bit better is the identification. And that's a challenge in the organization that we work in because of the DevOps organization. It's not one central function. There are many other functions being involved. So we're pretty good, but not quite where we want to be. And we recognize that as we roll out to ServiceNow and start to exploit and leverage some of the capability that platform offers us, we think we can make really good improvements in that space. So we're governed by controls and we're measured by performance indicators. So two separate things, but our performance indicators I think are very different. I've not seen these, or I hadn't seen these before before I joined HSBC. Our dashboards, because of the data we capture, they visualize our incident timelines at both an individual, so pick me an incident, and at a macro level, pick me a range of incidents, and we feed those into our forensic problem investigations. So what that looks like is this. This is a screenshot of one of our reports for a particular incident. So this can show you that the incident life cycle was 1 hour 51. We had about 34 minutes worth, an hour and 34 minutes worth of outage. But you can see each of the sections and how long they took, and then they break down between each of the key activities within that incident management timeline. And being able to see that and understand, why did it take us 27 minutes to detect this? Why was mobilization 16 minutes? And then, could we have shortened that 49-minute recovery time? Seeing all those things and being able to really drive into the detail absolutely has helped us drive some annual MTTR reductions. So again, I've taken some of the detail off here, but these are accurate graphs to scale to each other, and you can see we've had a really big improvement from 2019 to 2020, and then we're about another 30% faster than that in this year so far, and for all our major incidents we're running at about 4 hours, and some of those are full outages and some of those are degraded outages. Some of those are ones that we can fix without intervention from the business. Some of them are not. Some of them, of course, are the ones where we're not able to deploy a fix right away because we have to wait for a business time or a quiet period in operation. So really pretty good given the size and scale and complexity of what we run. In terms of challenges, though, that we have running major incident management in the bank, I think there are probably 6 big ones. So number one is that we have a different level of DevOps and agile maturity across our support teams across the whole bank, and what that means is that in some regions and some businesses, major incident management kind of get involved in things that are not major incidents because we don't necessarily have the right or the same enterprise-wide communication tooling that we do in other pods. So sometimes major incident have to step in and do some of that. So that, it's like stepping down from the biggest issues we've got into some that are really not that big, and trying to manage that expectation across the team. So we'll be looking at that as we migrate and deploy into ServiceNow. Similarly, tool proliferation. We have this issue where multiple platforms across those different organizations that have all developed their own little ecosystems, and sometimes quite big ecosystems actually, and they're not all talking the same language. And while they do all feed into our golden source of truth, what it means is that if you looked into our GSD platform, our core service management toolset, that information is probably it's not always the most detailed or the most well-managed content, because that's happening elsewhere. And that just means that, some of our analysis and some of our insight isn't as powerful as we would want it to be. Again, future deployment of a different tool set will help us deal with that. Number 3 is about the regional variances. So we do accept and acknowledge that our global process has to have some regional flex, but it flexes in some regions more than it flexes in others. And whilst we're supportive, I'm supportive of that, it can be very difficult to to give a process that meets everybody's requirements, and it always seems like a bargaining deal that you're in. I can't quite give you that, but I can give you this because this person over here needs that. So trying to get that process to a level that everybody kind of buys into and doesn't want to change is quite tricky. Change volumes, talked about it at the beginning, but just to reiterate, there's 1 change per minute across our global IT estate. And I used to look after change management, and I used to kind of rail against the suggestion that the more change there is, the more incidents there are. But I think we all probably acknowledge that is the case. And whilst we are doing over 500,000 changes a year, and we have a really high success rate, even that very small failure rate does drive a larger number of incidents. So quite a volatile estate to work in. Number 5 is about our fragmented comms. So this is kind of linked to 1 and 2 here, but when we looked across the organization to understand how the communication platform is working, we found, you can see some of the numbers there, 11 ways of assessing incidents across the business units, 24 sets of labels. How do we tag an incident? What do we call it in terms of its severity or priority or urgency or impact? 16 tools that we use to communicate that out, and 54 different looks and feels for those incident comms. All of which really means that if you are on the receiving end of those communications, it can be quite difficult to know whether you're seeing the same information about the same change or different incidents, or not. So we have a big piece of work ongoing now to consolidate those down, and move us perhaps a little bit more to a centralized view of, this is how we do communications, this is what they look and feel like, this is the channel to go through, maybe moving away from that federated piece that we've used before. And then the final one, right, is a kind of a blessing, and not so much a blessing, that I'm sure many of you kind of feel and live as well. Our capability, right, to run these big incidents and to drive things at pace and to assign people to tasks, and the fact that we're 24/7 and global, it means that we're often asked to take charge of other events, and that's a constant interesting debate about what our scope is and whether we're best placed to deal with those things or not. But I think, as we mature the organisation and our capabilities, we are helping the rest of the business understand exactly what is major incident and what is, I don't know, risk remediation or vulnerability remediation that may not be major incidents. But there's an ongoing interesting conversation about, how we put our best teams in front of our best problems, I guess is the best way of putting that. Okay, in terms of my team then and our strategy and how we try to drive our evolution, it's really simple. We have a 3-pillar strategy and then this simple philosophy. So the strategy is all about kind of people, it's people, it's our process, and it's our tools, and the philosophy is that we would rather do continual improvement, betterment every day rather than delaying until we think everything is perfect. So under our people strand, we're looking to make sure that everything is really simplified and straightforward to kind of iron out or at least minimize those regional variances, strengthen our capability. I think one of the things I noticed when I joined the bank was we had a lot of people who had long tenure in the organisation, and that's really great, right, for knowing who to talk to and what the systems do and having historic insight. What I've tried to do with the help of my regional leads is to strengthen and build on that by bringing in people from other organisations, not even always other banks, but just other organisations who've worked differently and can bring a different set of fresh insights, which is the third piece, right? Learn from outside. And that's one of the reasons that I'm presenting here as well, is to share what we do, make some contacts, and obviously try and get the best practices working as we can for HSBC. In terms of process, very similar. Let's consolidate our processes, make sure that they're really, really clear. Some of them have become a little bit complex over time, when actually, we can make them really simple, and using some of our tooling that we'll talk about in a minute. How do we simplify that, make it really easy for people to engage, and then accelerate our development of our process. I'm sure all of you will recognize that in major incident management, your day can be disrupted quite easily. So even when you have a backlog of things that you want to kind of improve, it can be difficult to get to that. So we're trying to really hard to carve out time to do that and accelerate our process improvement. And then on the third pillar, under tools, we have some tools that I think we probably don't exploit or leverage as well as we can. So we're trying to improve the use of those. We're trying to integrate as we move more towards industry standard platforms and tool sets. What can we make X Matters and Teams do together that helps automate, which is the third piece of that pillar. So quite a bit of what we do today is manual, and we need to move as the bank is doing towards automating all of that activity. And then, the key philosophy that underpins it, as I've said, is, let's just be better this week than we were last week, even if it's a tiny little change. It's just moving us forward. And eventually, when you look back after a quarter or a half or a full year, actually you've come quite far without having to do a long drawn out program of work that delivers a host of things in November or December. So that's what we try and do. And that's interesting journey, trying to take reactive major incident managers into a place where we're being quite iterative and quite agile, but really successful in achieving that. And then the very last thing, probably just to talk about, I guess, is my reflections about my kind of 2 big roles with running major incident management. So one, running a single in-country telco, and the other one working as I do today for HSBC that stretches across the bank, stretches across the globe. And I think really there are kind of 5 big differences, and we've touched on these in the presentation. But just the sheer complexity of the business. We multiple businesses in multiple regions, different countries. We have a raft of stakeholders and requirements. And so not only is it difficult to find a process that fits everybody, but maturing that and developing it is just naturally a little bit slower because we have multiple views and opinions and sign-offs, and trying to balance what we're doing with what's emerging and what people want us to talk about is quite hard. In the telco, right, that was a streamlined organization structure that one reporting line in that IT place where everybody reported to, and so making change was easier, it was simpler, it was faster, coherent approach, consistent adoption of tools, technology, process, much simpler. It's quite a bit more challenging in the bank, which is actually one of the reasons that I joined. I wanted to see whether we could make that change in something as wildly different. Same goes for like the federated tools and processes. Back in the telco, with an exception of one unit, everyone was on the same core tool set, and all the process innovation, the maturity and the development was kind of driven from the center. In the bank, each area, each business is using its own tool set that's APIing into our core. They've all got, really smart, really clever, innovative people in there. The center are not traditionally seen as innovative. And so what we've got is I guess, an uneven landscape of tooling and data and capability. What we're now starting to do in the center is be a little bit stronger about that and actually starting to drive that. And that's as a result of a number of key appointments that have helped us move that needle. And really that's paved the way for the IT service management migration that we've talked about, which finally puts everybody on that same tool set. In terms of the IT landscape, the telcos that I was working for was around 30 years old when I left, and whilst some of the newer entrants into that market had newer kit, fancier kit, 30 years old was seen as quite old, and we need to do something about it. Well, imagine being in a bank that's been around for over 165 years. Whilst we definitely didn't have computers back then, there's a lot more IT to deal with. 8,500 services, and lots of mergers and acquisitions have brought together different systems. We've got digital front ends on some of our legacy back ends. And whilst it's really well managed, and hopefully if you're an HSBC customer, you'll see the benefit of that. But it just gives the chance for more things to go wrong, especially when you combine it with that fast pace of change. And then the last two, the regulatory oversight is just a mind blower for me. When I came from the telco, it just didn't really figure at all. We were run on performance indicators, and whilst there's one regulator for the UK mobile phone industry, and they were very clear on what they wanted. In the bank, right, we have 400 regulatory bodies across the countries and territories that we operate on. There are so many types of incidents that are regulatory reportable, and different regulations and requirements across that footprint, different timescales. So trying to understand whether this incident will or has or might breach a threshold, really, really difficult, really challenging to do. Compared with, have I got provision of service for a vulnerable group of people or a remote location where that's really easy to see, whether your cell site has gone down or whether you've lost coverage. It's not quite as simple in here. And because of that regulatory environment, the controls, our day-to-day operation is measured by a lot of those controls, some of which we talked about earlier. Every part of my process is subject to a control where we have continual audit, we have twice yearly design reviews, we have internal and external, we have central bodies in different countries and territories who want to come and make sure that we are doing what we say we do in the best way that they think we should be able to do it. So, that almost becomes a full-time job to kind of evidence and then maintain and mature those controls. But, we absolutely get why they are there. They're there to maintain the integrity of the bank and mitigate risk so that, our customers, communities, shareholders, economies are all protected. But a very big difference, I think, between those two areas. And that's all I have for you. A whistle-stop tour of how we run and operate global incident management at HSBC. I hope you found that useful. Please do reach out to me through the forum, through Adam and the MIM team, or separately on LinkedIn. It'd be great to chat with you, find out what you think is similar and what's different in your world, and maybe strike up some other industry-wide relationships. Thank you for your time. Hopefully speak to some of you later. Thank you. Bye.
MIM Virtual Expo 2021. MIM